everybody, Peter here from the Esoteric Order of Gamers, and today we're talking about something enormous. Yes, it's the game Enormity from Into the Unknown Studios, the makers of Aeon Trespass Odyssey, which was a huge game I covered and created a rule summary for and did a review and the whole bit. And Into the Unknown has very kindly sent me a prototype of their new game, which shares some of the mechanics from Aeon Trespass Odyssey, but is instead set on a derelict spaceship hurtling into the unknown with a poor little bunch of spacers stuck on it, having to work their way through this spaceship and encounter horrific things that are out to kill them with nasty big teeth. Yes, it's sci-fi horror with a bit of a Lovecraftian flavour as well. And it's a big game. Now, this demo is just a chunk of gameplay. It's basically one scenario. And I've got to make it clear right from the start that this is not a review because I don't have the full game. I just have this prototype which is showing me basically how it plays. So in this video, my object is to show you what I've got here. Remember that these are all prototype elements, so nothing here is set in stone, and it may change when the final product comes out. And I want to show you the rules, roughly how the game plays, and I will have some thoughts on it, but everything is in flux as this isn't the final game. So this is just to help you with your decision when the crowdfunding campaign starts and you decide whether you want to back this science fiction adventure game. And one more thing before I get started, they sent me this to show to you, but I'm not getting paid for this video and my opinions are my own. Right, let's discover Enormity. Well, folks, there's a lot to get through here, but I'm not going to go into crazy detail because I want to give you an overview of how this plays. If you're at all familiar with Aeon Trespass Odyssey, you'll know that Into the Unknown Studio love a lot of heavy detail in their games. They also have this system that they are very fond of, which is the idea that the game ramps up in difficulty, and even the combats ramp up in difficulty as they go along. So they work up to a big climax. So you'll find in everything here that philosophy is at play. The game has a countdown track, which as it goes up through the 3 different stages, ramps up the difficulty of the game. Things get more and more horrific for our poor little spacers in the derelict spaceship. And during combats, much as in Aeon Trespass Odyssey, things get more and more horrific as the combat goes on, and your opponent and your own strengths as spacers get greater and greater as the combat continues. There's also another important mechanic that players of the previous game will recognise, and that is the use of counters in a pool, different types of counters, which can be used by the player that is following you. They call this a sort of hard cooperative system, which means that as you're having your turn, you're also supplying the next player, the next person who takes their turn, with counters that they can use during their turn. So you're not just concentrating on your own turn, you're also preparing the way for the next person. And in this game, it's all about 3 tokens in that pool, and they are confidence tokens, discipline tokens, and expertise tokens. And they do various things. The confidence tokens allow you to re-roll a single die. The discipline tokens allow you to turn a potential result, which is a particular type of result, on a die to a more effective power result. And the expertise allows you to pay the cost of various actions, and you can also use it to mitigate damage. So no matter the result of your dice rolls, there are plenty of opportunities to change those rolls into results that you need by using those tokens. Now, in essence, Aeon Trespass was divided into 2 different types of play. There was adventuring on a world map, and then there were boss battles on a large combat map. Now, you've still got those boss battles in here, and they use similar mechanics in that each one of the bosses that you fight has their own AI deck and their body parts deck, and players of the previous game will recognise those systems, though they have been a bit streamlined here. However, the adventuring section also has a lot of combat in it as well, because in these sections you'll be travelling through the derelict spaceship, encountering monsters, collecting gear, having story elements come up, that keep the story flowing. It's sort of like a big self-contained scenario. And you can go from those into boss battles and then back into the corridor sections, and they can join up to form a large map of the ship. Though, of course, you'll be taking parts of the map away and putting down new parts so it doesn't take up huge amounts of table space. And also there'll be a place in the ship where you can feel safe and you can do crafting and gain experience and develop your characters and all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to cover that part of it at all because it's not in this prototype, but be aware there'll be a lot of that as well. All through the rules for this, they've emphasised that there are just going to be heaps and heaps and heaps of options for gear and story elements and upgrading your character and different suits that these spaces can wear, different weapons and all that kind of stuff. So there's going to be a lot of content there. For the detail-oriented among you, you're going to absolutely love this, I think, because you'll be able to get very, very deep into a huge amount of choice that this game offers. However, with choice comes complexity, and this is a complex game. Again, like Aeon Trespass Odyssey, this is not for the faint-hearted. There's a lot going on. You've got a lot of cards in front of you have to keep track of. There's gear, you've got to know what that does. You've got to keep track of ammo. There are stats that change all the time and create counters for the pool. You've got to be aware what those counters do and use them at the right time. There's a lot going on. So this is a very deep game and quite complex. I've taken a very large rule book and I had to summarise it down to 4 pages just for my own use so I could get to know the rules. And this is really just the tip of the iceberg. So keep that in mind. This is a complex game. However, it is quite atmospheric as well. So you'll be travelling on these boards. As I said, there's going to be a lot of these boards that all fit together in different ways. Now, you've got 2 location books in this demo which just have a few maps on them, but in the final game there'll be far more maps. I'm not sure how many you can have out on the board at the same time, but in different configurations there's multiple configurations. There are lots of different monsters as well that you can meet along the way. They have large boards to facilitate the control of those. They have AI routines for fighting, and of course stats change depending on the level that you're on the countdown track. So your poor characters are trying to survive this onslaught of beasties. And what do they have to help them do that? Well, they've got a character card and they've got something called a Rubicon. And the Rubicon sits in between their character card and their suit card. Now, of course, you can get different suits during the game as you upgrade, but your character stays the same. Your character has a certain number of skills which they can use to make skill tests in situations. And they have 3 main stats, and they are stress, which is the yellow marker, vitals, which is basically the number of wounds you can take, that's the red marker. And then you've got the very important adrenaline marker, which is like a bar that moves up this Rubicon. And every time your adrenaline marker moves up, you'll see that the bar is a cutoff point for the icons that appear on the character card and the suit card. And what you do is you take the tokens that are to the left of that bar and you put them in the pool. So the more adrenaline you have, the more opportunities you have for creating these tokens and putting them in the pool to aid you in the gameplay. So you always have 4 spaces and they can take turns in any order. When a spacer takes a turn, they use their action cards. They can take 3 actions, and these are double-sided cards. And in a nice trick, they're actually made up of 2 cards placed into a sleeve. Now, this is just standard for the prototype, but during the full game, you'll have lots and lots of options to put action cards on either side of this in your sleeve. And then you can use one side of it when you choose an action, but you won't be able to use the other side unless you have some special ability that lets you flip it or do things like that. So, for example, on this card, I've got Cautious Sneaking on one side, which is a move action and allows me to move 1 space. It's got some other stuff, but that's basically it. On the other side, it's a Steady Walk, and I can move 2 spaces, but I'll make noise. Now, if I make noise, either by moving or firing a gun or something like that, I may attract blips to me. Yes, we have blips, much in the classic vein of games like Space Hulk, and of course films like Aliens. We've got blips travelling around the board and we don't know what they are or where they are until they show up looking over your shoulder and trying to bite your head off. So yes, there is a noise mechanic in this game, and you have to be careful not to make too much noise so you don't attract too many blips to you and thus get involved in too much combat. So you play 3 of these action cards, as I said, to let you do various things. Now there's not just movement, of course, there's a whole bunch of actions that are on these cards, and they are things like you can attack, you can catch your breath, which allows you to lower your adrenaline. You can do a fast reload or a full reload of your weapon. Yes, your weapons have ammo and you have to keep track of it. You can move, as I said. You can scavenge, which means you can look at objects on the board. There's also an option to do a fast scavenge while you're moving. You can rearm, which allows you to unexhaust exhausted cards, and you can scout, which allows you to use the light on your suit to try and reveal blips and see if they're just echoes and nothing at all, or some horrible greebly coming out of the shadows trying to kill you. Now, you're not just randomly wandering around the corridors of this derelict spaceship. There are, of course, a lot of story cards that direct the scenario and allow you to do certain things. Doors will be closed. You'll have to go to the consoles to open the doors. There will be discovery tokens, and a discovery token will correspond to a particular card, which gives you another story element. There are also gear tokens to pick up, gear caches where you can find gear. There's a nice little 3D gear card holder here, and you take your gear cards from the bottom so you can't see what they are. The gear changes depending on the scenario. There's also what are called engrams, which are things that you can pick up, and they do different things depending on the scenario. So in the case of the first scenario, you might pick up a particular engram, and it might be a psychoactive balm pad, which allows you to recover 2 stress. So that's a handy thing. And when you use an engram, you turn it over and it becomes a resource. So the resource for a psychoactive balm pad is in fact psychoactive chemicals. So at the end of your particular scenario, you can use those resources to do various things. Other large scenario cards will give you main objectives and secondary objectives, and of course things will escalate as you move on through the ship and go onto different maps and meet horrible monsters. Now, of course, when you meet horrible monsters, you want to kill them and they want to kill you, so there is a combat system, and it's relatively straightforward for this part of the game. You have dice which come in 3 different levels, white, black and red, which correspond to the countdown track, and you roll dice depending on what weapon you're using. So there's a lot of icons and stats on the weapon that you're using, how many dice to roll, whether you get complementary tokens to allow you to do different things. If you have a particular level of adrenaline, for example, you might get an extra die, stuff like that. There's a range, of course. And there's a chance to do critical damage as well. And what you have to do is do enough damage to exceed the monster's antimony threshold, which is a very, very fancy term for basically their defense. And if you do that, usually these lower tier creatures will be killed in one go. But if you don't manage to reach that threshold, you can do a certain number of suppression tokens, which lowers their effectiveness when other people are attacking them. Now, after the spaces have done their phase, of course, there's an intruder phase, and that's when any intruders that have been revealed on the board will activate and try and go for you and rip your throat out. And then there's a blip phase where the little blips will move around the board. Now, all movement and range and stuff like that is done by orthogonal directions on the board. There are no diagonals. And an interesting thing is that the intruders and the spaces are moving from board square to board square, but the blips are actually moving on the intersections between those squares. And I thought this was a really nice thing, especially because the blips can move beyond the boundaries of the terrain area itself, the corridors and everything. So there's that feeling that they're moving outside the corridors in air conditioning ducts, somewhere over there in the blackness. You know, I think that's a really nice mechanic. They're not necessarily moving within the corridors where the spaces are, and they can leap out of the darkness in the side of a corridor or something, and as soon as they become adjacent to you, of course, they turn into intruders. Now, as I mentioned, intruders have their own AI routines, so you can go through a series of those. For example, the Grin, which is the first creature that you'll encounter, they have something called Black Snap, which means if the target is adjacent, the Grin's neck splits straight across, revealing an endlessness of teeth, whatever an endlessness of teeth is. and that's how much damage they do. If they do 6 or more damage, you gain the gift condition card, so you can get conditions. The next one is Scuttling Bite. If the target is in movement range, the grinning thing leaps to you frantically and bites you in the shoulder. And the other one is called Slither Run. So otherwise, the grin gallops at you on all fours, its mouth clicking, and it moves twice. So this gives a nice variety into the monster's actions, which of course was a big feature of Aeon Trespass Odyssey as well. Now there's a nice mechanic in the intruder phase when the blips move, and it uses this scanner. And this I think is inspired by the infection scanner, is it contagion? I forget, infection, contagion. Scanner in Nemesis. So it's a red filter, and basically what you do is you get a scanner card depending on the level that the countdown tracker's on, and you choose cardinal direction on the board, so say this direction, or it could be this direction, and the center of the scanner is basically where your spacer is. So you place it over there, and then you get the scanner card and you place it into the scanner, and it gives you a certain number of blips in the 4 quadrants of the map. And depending on the number of icons that are showing, that shows how fast each of the blips move in the direction they're facing. So when a blip moves in response to your noise, it'll move directly for you, but in the intruder phase, it'll move in the direction it's facing, depending on the results of this scanner. And it's a lovely little tactile element to the game. Now, when you get to the big boss battles, you'll have a larger map, and you'll be encountering something horrible. In this case, it's this thing, which I won't go into too much detail about, but it's a large miniature. And of course, there's going to be a huge variety of stuff. This is just a sample. But this monster and all the other horrible monsters like it will have their own decks of cards. And if you played the previous game, you'll basically recognize this, that you have body part cards, which are treated as wounds, and you have AI cards. So basically, the AI controls what the monster does, and there's an escalation mechanic. So all these cards are levels 1, 2, and 3, and as you wound the creature, cards from higher levels are shuffled into the deck, so everything escalates and gets more and more nasty until you finally do enough wounds to destroy the creature. Now, of course, there are books which have further entries. If you go to a console, for example, it'll direct you via a code to the book, and it might tell you which doors that console opens and things like that. So I imagine there's going to be heaps and heaps of that kind of content. So basically, I've just scratched the surface of this game. If you want a deep, detailed, involved science fiction horror game with what I suspect is going to have a lot of content, I think you might be very interested in this one. Of course, in something that we see a lot these days, there are envelopes with extra content and stuff like that. I imagine there'll be heaps of that in the final game. As I said, this is just a prototype, and it's just given me a taster for the game. And there are elements that I really, really like, but there is a lot of complexity here. So just be aware that this is not a quick game. It's not a simple game. It's the kind of game that you really want to get deeply into. I'm sure you can play it solo as well, and it might be really good for solo play. I've just played it with 2, and it went fine, but we did spend several hours just going through one section of corridor. So of course, it was the first time we played it. So, we were working our way through the rules, and that makes a big difference. It will flow more as you get to know it. But you are controlling the tokens constantly as your adrenaline goes up and down, and choosing which tokens to use, keeping track of abilities, all that kinds of things. So there's a lot happening here. And if you like that level of complexity and involvement, I think you'll be very interested in this game. And of course, if you loved Aeon Trespass Odyssey, I think this might be a bit of a no-brainer as long as you love the sci-fi theme, because it does share a lot of the mechanics and that overall philosophy of ramping up the difficulty as you go along. And of course, the AI cards for monsters, the emphasis on boss battling, the story elements, all that kind of thing as well is very similar to that game. So I think they've taken a lot of those mechanics and they've evolved them. I think there's stuff that is a bit simpler than Aeon Trespass Odyssey. It doesn't quite go into as much of the extra rules and extra detail that that game did. But as I said, there's still a lot of detail here. And certainly if you like the sci-fi horror concept, it reminded me a lot of Event Horizon, the film. And of course, they touch on other things like aliens as well. And I think that if that theme appeals and you like that previous game, this might be a no-brainer for you. Well, folks, that's Enormity. Just a prototype, but I think this has given you a bit of a taster of what it's like, and you can make an informed decision based on that information. Of course, check out orderofgamers.com, the website of the Esoteric Order of Gamers, where you can find almost 500, we're getting there, I think I'm up to 470 something, rules, summaries and references for popular games. And when this game comes out, I'm sure I'll be making one for that as well. Also, I've got a Discord channel, a lovely community of like-minded gamers. There's a link to that on the website if you want to go check it out. And I spend more time there these days than I do on social media. The other thing I want you to check out is my app, Tabletop Codex. It's available for both Apple and Android. It's pretty cool, I've got to tell you, and it's a fantastic way of learning and playing games. It's really easy to refer to any of those rule summaries that I have created carefully from scratch, and it's now in app form, broken up into sections, really easy to find rules questions during a game. Go and check it out. You can either subscribe to it and open up all the app and the hundreds of summaries that are in there, or you can buy the rules individually if you so choose. Thanks very much, everybody. I will see you next time, and bye for now. Good gaming.